Love the Yankees. I've been a Yankee fan since Moose Skowron and Tony Kubek and Clete Boyer and Whitey Ford and all the old team. 54 Yankees.
See, I remember those baseball cards, and I remember.
I do.
So when were you born? What's your birthday?
New Year's Day at 49.
So you were born in 1949. Was your dad in the service?
He was drafted for World War II right at the end in 45. He was drafted, but then he never had to report down at Fort Dix.
Mm-hmm.
And here he was with, I think at that time he had two children, I think, at that time. So he was like, I don't know what the classification was, 1D or something. It wasn't 1A, but so it wasn't like the first ones to go.
So were you raised here in Westfield?
No, Jamestown.
Jamestown.
Yep, on South Main Street. And
what was your dad's name?
Herbert Pearl Foster. And it was P-E-R-L. Kind of a different middle name.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly where that. I've done a lot of my family ancestry, and I don't know where that middle name.
His mother's maiden name, maybe.
Maybe his mother's middle name. I think her middle name was Pearl, but it was P-E-A-R-L.
Oh dear.
So, or his grandmother. I can't remember. One of them had a middle name of Pearl, so that may be where they picked it up. They didn't want it to be like a girl's spelling, so they dropped the A.
So you were born in Jamestown. How long did you stay in Jamestown?
Until I got drafted.
Okay, so did you go through Jamestown High School?
I did. Class of '67, and I was a high school dropout.
Mm-hmm.
My family was real poor, and I had a really rough time with school because of not having clothing and shoes and stuff like that, and so it was really tough. And so it was kind of, my dad, he went to the second grade, and he worked on his family farm in Ellery Center, and they lost their farm in the Depression, and he had 10 brothers and 2 sisters.
Oh my gosh.
Big family, and they all worked on the farm, and they worked at the golf course up by Bemis Point, or Hartfield, you know, that golf course right on the lake. So they used to walk from Ellery Center down there to caddy and try to make extra money for the family to survive through the Depression, but they didn't make it. And so a lot of the family, cousins, a lot of them still are around the Jamestown area. The family came to Jamestown from Bradford, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And they were one of the founding families of Bradford, Pennsylvania. And then the name Bradford came from Bradford, Vermont. And a lot of the family that settled in Bradford, PA, came from Vermont, upstate New York. And so that's where my family came. They have a cemetery in Lewis Run. It's called the Foster Cemetery. And if I'm not buried in Arlington Cemetery, I told my wife to bury me there to protect the cemetery, because right now they tried to destroy the graves that were there. And my great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-grandfather are buried there, and it's in the back of somebody's yard, and it's a subdivision. And Alan Foster, the one that's buried there, and Ephraim, he was born in 1776.
You're quite the genealogist.
I am. I did my family tree back to 600 AD.
Oh my word.
Yeah, and I got to do it because I was stationed over at RAF Lakenheath, and over there, England takes ancestry to a totally different level.
Yeah.
And so it happens that when I got my family back to, I think about the early 1600s, the family tree just took off because somebody had already done, a lot of people actually worked on it. And so it just took off like wildfire on ancestry. And they end up being blue bloods and royal family from Europe. Flanders is where my family originated. And they went to England with a Norman invasion with William the Conqueror.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's how far back it went. And so I was able to do the family tree back that far. And I actually went to my 17th great-grandfather's grave. That was an amazing...
How many years back would that be then? 17th grand?
He was born in 1513, and he died, I think it was 1603, and he was the Supreme High Justice in Queen Elizabeth I's court. Court of Common Pleas.
Yeah. What was his name?
His name was Thomas Foster. Sir Thomas Foster. I got the church where he's buried inside of a church, and he's buried next to King Henry VIII's comptroller. And he actually has an esophagus, and it's a fenced, iron wrought fenced in inside the church right next to the altar. And the church was St. Mary's Catholic Church in Hunsdon, Hertfordshire, England, but now they call it, the Church of England in Hunsdon, because all the Catholic churches got taken, and they became, the Church of England. But they still do the same thing as a Catholic church with their ceremonies and everything.
Now, Bradford, Pennsylvania has an area called Foster Brook, too.
That's right. It's named after my ancestors.
Yeah.
They founded, they called it Tuna Valley.
Tuna Valley.
Yep. And it was Alan Foster went there with his son Ephraim. And Alan's father was William Foster. And he was a private in the Second Continental Army. And he had his leg blown off at the Battle of Saratoga.
Oh, yeah.
And he lived in Marcellus, New York for a while.
Yeah.
And there's actually a town named after them, but it's not, you don't pronounce it Foster, New York, it's Restop. So the people wanted to honor the family, but they went and spelled Foster backward as a joke. And so it's called Restop, R-E-T-S-O-F, Restop, New York. And it's right by Marcellus, and there's a Foster cemetery there. I don't know who are all buried in it. I haven't ever seen a schematic of the plots and who's there. But there's stories that Alan and Ephraim took William to Southampton, because that's where all the Fosters are buried. Christopher Foster, that's my grandfather. He came over on the Abigail and into Boston in 1634, and they went and lived in Lynn, Massachusetts. And his wife got really sick, and they pretty much lost everything trying to pay to get her well. And so back those days, the movement to America, and this was the Winthrop fleet that the Abigail came over in, and back in those days, it wasn't families per se that came, it was churches that came. Entire churches got on a ship and came to America on a ship, and they settled in one town, and that whole church lived in that town. Well, the family went to Southampton, Long Island in 1635, and because of their Dutch heritage, as I told you, my family went back to 600 AD. They had actual Dutch royal blood. Belgium and New Amsterdam. The governor of New Amsterdam was Stuyvesant, and he gave my family, my grandfather's, 660 acres in near Queens.
Can you imagine what that'd be worth today?
Well, it's actually worth a lot. Yeah, that place, it was called, they named it Foster's Meadow, and now it's called Belmont Racetrack.
Oh.
Wow.
It is funny, isn't it? And as I was doing family trees, my mother's family is from Sinclairville area, Charlotte Center, and so I didn't know, but her family married in a line with Burnhams, but that Burnham was actually Brigham. It was Brigham, and it became Burnham. They misspellings or census takers misspelling it, and then taking on a different name. So I found my mother's grandfather's and grandmother's graves that she never saw, and they were only a few miles from where she was raised. And it was called Burnham Hollow Cemetery. And that's where the Burnhams, some of the Burnhams are buried, and her grandfather's Luces are buried up there. But anyhow, coming into this Foster's Meadow, in that Belmont Racetrack, well, the Burnhams got involved with the chases. My mother was a chase, and they had the first racehorse in the first race in a Belmont Racetrack, and it was a horse from Sinclairville.
Wow.
And it won the first Belmont race.
A Sinclairville horse won the first Belmont race.
Yep. And the owners of it.
So formerly owned by you, or land formerly owned by you.
Yep.
Or your family.
Yep.
Jeez.
You start doing your family trees. They connect in the weirdest ways. They cross paths, and me, because the way my life has been going, I felt strongly that our ancestors cry out for us to find them, and to know them, and to know what they went through, and to know the sacrifices they went through. As your program here is wanting Chautauqua County and New York to know the sacrifices the military members of Chautauqua County sacrificed for their freedom. And so I feel when I was stationed over in RAF Lakenheath, I was the base accounting liaison officer for the 48th Fighter Wing over there. And I felt that my ancestors were crying out to me to find them, to come and see them in their graves, and to put a flower on a grave that may not have seen a flower in 100 years. But I thought, what better thing to pass on the knowledge of all of what our ancestors went through for us to be where we are today.
Of all the ancestors,
Can I stop just a second? Can I turn off that light there?
Yeah.
Just turn off that light.
Yeah,
I get it.
I got it okay.
Of all the ancestors you researched, which one would you like to talk with, and why? If you had one to pick out, the most interesting one, why?
Gosh, I don't know. I would like to have talked to a couple of them, but one for sure would have been Sir Thomas Foster, and he was the Supreme Court Justice, and he's buried in an esophagus, and his name, he changed his name from Forster to Foster. And he did it because his wife, her last name was Forster, her maiden name. So he didn't want it to appear as if he married a cousin or, you know.
Sister, maybe.
Yeah. Well, back those days, a lot of times that happened to families because, they didn't have the transportation that there is nowadays. And when you met somebody, it was usually somebody that lived near you. And back those days, there was a lot of family living around you. On one road, you could have, all of your cousins back 2 or 3 generations. I don't know. I don't think it was easy for family to move away and work something else. Probably 90% of people were farmers, I would imagine. And they had trades, almost like the way the Amish live nowadays. And they take on trades, leather trades, iron, trades. They take on skilled trades besides raising, crops. And the wives, their big duties were the family garden, maintaining it. And a lot of times they put the gardens right in the front of the house, or right on the front yard, right by the road where people would go by in their carriages, and they wouldn't be going that fast. And so pretty much their only contact was the carriages going by. And the only way they would probably have missed it all if they weren't out in the front yard. So, I think about it, it's probably how they had their Facebook was, out in the front yard, probably.
When did you get into the Air Force then? When did that come?
1967.
67.
Yep. 11th of August, 1967. And I went with quite a few guys from Jamestown area. Bill,
And you were drafted?
I had my draft notice, and then I chose to enlist. I enlisted in the Air Force, and went to Lackland. A guy that I've seen quite a few times around. I don't know if he's still alive. I haven't seen him in a while. And of course, with this cancer, I haven't been around too much. But Bill Curry, and our family used to walk from South Main Street. I lived right above Prather, and we used to walk down, and I went to the Bethel Baptist Church, and that's where I went. I was trying to remember some of the pastors and ministers that were there. I've tried this one minister. I was really good friends with him. I think Mincher, and he went to Pakistan as a I can't think of what they call him. Missionary, yeah. So, and he was over there his whole life. I don't know if he died over there or not. Maybe his name was Reed Minnick. Reed Minnick. And then, so I went to that church until I was about 10 or 11, I guess. And then I kind of started going to different churches on my own. And
what did you do in the Air Force?
I was direct duty assignment as a fuel specialist.
But just for fun, Leroy, why don't you walk us through your process? You enlisted into the Air Force. You went to basic training.
Lackland Air Force Base.
Right.
And I got out of there in November of '67. I went direct duty assignment to Westover Air Force Base with a 99th Bomb Wing. And I was a fuel specialist. And so they had on-duty training. You started out with a 3-level, 5-level. Then you were an apprenticed fuel specialist when you first started. And so my first duty section was the bulk storage section at Westover Air Force Base. And I was in that job for, I guess about 6 months. And I didn't like it too much because there was never much to do. Yeah, you was pulling weeds, in the dikes, and which was the embankments around the tanks, fuel tanks. And that was pretty much it. And transferring fuel to the hydrant system pump houses, but then they transferred me to distribution section, the mobile refueling fleet section, and I worked for he was a warrant officer, and which wasn't enlisted and it wasn't a officer. It was like in between.
Yeah.
I think they were called Mister, I think. Well, so anyhow, I love that. I love that job. I refueled 52s and KC-135s, and we had C-124 Globemasters there, which took a 115, 145 avgas, and then when you serviced it, they took on oil and ADI. So it was like a triple servicing when you had to service one of those, and so then we had B-58 Hustlers that were right at the point of going out of service, and we had F-106 Delta Darts there on alert at Westover, and
where for the camera? Where was Westover?
Springfield, Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you.
And so I operated all kinds of refueling trucks and hydrant systems and the hydrant hose carts that they hooked up, Moosehead and Panero connections. They had two different types of hydrant systems, and refueling. Usually with the hose carts, we're doing an empty 52 or a 135. One time one of the air crews forgot to put up one of the stands that supports the back of the aircraft on a KC-135. I don't know if you ever seen them. It's a big pole and it goes right up into the tail. Well, if they don't transfer the tanks right while we're pumping the fuel on, if they put too much fuel in the aft tank, it could tip the plane right back on its rear end, and that happened.
But there's a whole lot of explaining to do on that one, huh?
Yeah, it actually ruptured the fuel tank in the back.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, that was big money. Somebody got fired over that, but I don't know.
Yeah, they lost a few stripes anyways.
Yeah, well, more than lost a few stripes. They probably got jail time because they weren't following their checklists, refueling. And so that was a really tough job in the wintertime at Westover.
Yeah.
They used to call this thing called the hawk, and that was the wind in the wintertime, and it would freeze. That would actually freeze you right on the spot. And a refueling could last 3.5 to 4 hours.
Wow.
The most I ever put on a B-52 was 87,000 gallons at one refueling. That's a lot of gas.
How long would that take?
It was about 4.5 hours.
4.5 hours. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
And you have to be there because you couldn't just.
Well, yeah, you have to hold a dead man switch.
Oh.
You
So
have
you're gonna be right next to the plane doing all this, right?
Well, a lot of times I ended up underneath the plane, under the bomb bay, because
So you couldn't really get out of the wind too much.
not much.
Oh.
One time I actually we were pumping away, and I actually got snowed in. I didn't even know it, and I had to dig my way out from under the plane.
Wow.
I was snowed in, under the plane. We had to actually come out, and the guys had to come out and shovel the hose car out to get it, to pull it away from the plane. It snowed it right in.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just awful. Sometimes the conditions were really hazardous. I had one time, I was driving a 5-ton truck pulling a MK1 refueling trailer, and it had the pumping apparatus on the back of the trailer, and it had a fifth wheel, and then the back set of 8 wheels.
They turned too.
Which they turned too, right? And so one time I was going out to service the F-106, which was on the back side of the flight line, and you had to go down and around the runway and out to the back side of the airbase, and my brakes caught fire on this trailer.
Not a good thing.
No, it was on fire. And I didn't know it. And here I was going down the road. I think I was doing about, the top speed on the base was 35. So I was doing about maybe 30 miles an hour. And I look in my mirrors, and all of a sudden I see all the smoke. And I pull the truck over, and I don't feel so good because that's 5,000 gallons of JP4.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't have time to kiss body parts.
No.
Flying.
Right. So here I got out, and we had fire extinguishers in the cab, and I jumped out, and I went to the back, and I started blasting away. And thankfully somebody saw me, and I had a radio with me, and I radioed the dispatch, but somebody saw what was happening, and they got the fire department to come out and help me cool the brakes off. That was a really scary time. And that was like 7, 8 o'clock at night. It was just past dusk. So you couldn't see really well, but I could see the brakes were red hot. It was just, and they had aircraft land before with red hot brakes, where they had to get on them to try to stop them. So I've seen quite a few different things. When I went in September of '68. I went to ArcLight. And ArcLight was one of the TDYs that they would send guys over to the Vietnam War. And so I went on this movement with our B-52s and KC-135s. They called them Young Tigers. And so we loaded up, all the support personnel loaded up in the KC-135s, and we landed at Travis Air Force Base, and then from Travis we direct flighted right to Hickam, or not Hickam, Guam, Anderson, and we actually landed before we took off.
Oh, because of the time zone.
Yeah, the time zone. It was a really weird thing. And it was kind of, it was September. It was kind of chilly, when we loaded up everything. And when you're riding one of those KC-135s, you're having to sit sideways. It's not like aircraft or passenger seats. And these were in nets alongside the fuselage of the plane. And here you are in this, netting, which isn't comfortable at all. And on those KC-135s, when they go up so high, they actually form rain clouds inside the plane, and it will actually rain on you inside the plane. You'll get just the weirdest thing. And so when we landed at Anderson and they opened up the side door, and that heat just hit you, it was like, holy man, just like, the humidity was so heavy you could hardly breathe it. And so that was the first shock. And they gave us 3 days to process in. And I went to I didn't even get to stay on base. I went to this place called the Marble Barracks Complex, Annex, which was about 3 or 4 or 5 miles off base at Anderson. They called it Andy South, and it was old barracks from World War II, and they were concrete barracks, and they were open bay. They did have rooms, and they'd have 2 guys to a room, but the rooms were for higher ranking guys, and here I was just a one-striper, so I was open bay, and you got a locker and 8 other guys, and that made up a cubicle. And you had 4 bunk beds with the lockers, and that was your home. And so our days were 12-hour shifts, and the first thing, roll call at the Andy 2 fuel tank farm. A roll call. They were wanting a volunteer to do some herbicide spraying, and they had remember I was telling you about the oil and ADI? Well, ADI, I think it's called anti-detonation something fluid that they put on the plane on these props. And so they took one of these old ADI trailers, and it was actually an A1B trailer, 750-gallon trailer, and that's what they were using to spray herbicides. So to make a long story short, they gave me a pair of rubber boots to put over my combat boots and a rubber apron that was used for liquid oxygen transfer, black apron, and the rope went around the back and then back around the front, and then you tied it in the front of you. And then I had rubber gloves that went up to my elbows, and a plastic face shield that was used for liquid oxygen transfer. Well, that's what they gave me to transfer the Agent Orange drums. The ADI trailer had a gasoline engine on it, and it had an evac where it would suck. And so then we would take the hose with a downspout and stick down in the drum and suck the Agent Orange drum into the trailer.
What was it called at the time? We now know it as Agent Orange. What was it called then?
It was just, well, they just called it a herbicide.
But didn't have it.
Well, they had different kinds. You had Agent Orange, Agent White, Agent Blue, Agent Purple.
So it was actually called that.
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
Okay.
And some of the stuff would have bands on them, so you could see what kind it was, whether a white stripe or a orange stripe. Sometimes they had stripes on them, but most of the time the stripes wore off, or they re-drummed the stuff because the drums would rust and leak, and then they transferred into another drum. And
So you really didn't know?
you didn't know, really.
So the herbicide, the ultimate goal was to use that going from Guam to Vietnam?
Yeah, Vietnam and Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Okinawa. We had the USS White Plains that would come into Apra Harbor, and the White Plains was one of the known ships that carried the Agent Orange over to Vietnam and Thailand. And
Describe the White Plains. What's that mean?
That was ship, USS White Plains, and it got grounded at Apra Harbor during a typhoon. I actually got some pictures on my phone where the USS White Plains was beached there at Apra Harbor. I don't know what they do to get a ship refloated, or I don't know. They just drag it back off of the coral, or if they have to jack it up, or I don't know how, or they wait for a high tide, or I don't know how they.
So that's how you actually more or less got the Agent Orange product, was from the USS.
Well, I don't know if it was from the White Plains. No, they brought it over on container ships.
Okay.
Into Apra Harbor. It was brought. Get this. It was brought up from Apra Harbor on 40-foot flatbeds with the U.S. Marine escorts to Anderson. And they did the same thing with the bombs. They brought them up from Apra Harbor up through the island on flatbeds, 40-foot flatbeds. And, I've been deeply involved with this Agent Orange having it recognized for Guam. And a lot of guys were there. A lot of guys were there. During the Vietnam War, we had 22 Air Force bases that did arc light to Guam, 6-month tours. And the entire bases had to send all the personnel there to support those aircraft at Anderson. So that was a lot of people over.
That would be a lot of people, yeah.
Well, when did they start arc light? In 65, 64. They started 64 or 65. They started arc light to Anderson.
Can you just, again, for the camera, because we're trying to educate, what was the arc light?
Arc light was the name of a temporary duty deployment to the Pacific theater of operations for the Vietnam War, okay. And it could involve Kadena, Anderson, Utapao, Udorn. Maybe Massawa. Maybe Clark Air Base, Philippines. I don't know if ArcLight went to Clark. I can't remember if anybody was arc light deployed to Clark. I don't think so. They didn't have the facilities or the storage facilities to, even though they had Subic there, I don't believe they had these storage facilities to do any kind of B-52 deployments. It was pretty much Utapau and Kadena and Anderson.
So the arc light would be, how long would the deployment be? 6 months?
I can tell you exactly. It's 181 days. And if it was a day more, they had to change it from a TDY to a PCS. And that involved a lot more money. Because that was permanent change of station. And so they would have had to pay you, and you would have been entitled to a lot different types of things. So my deployment, it was more than 100, maybe no, it was 189 days. If it was one day more than 189, it was a PCS. So my deployment was more than 189 days, but they didn't change it to a PCS, but they gave me credit for a short tour because it was more than 189 day deployment.
Then you would come back.
Yep, then I came back, and then they kept me back here. I came back in March 15th of 1969, back to Westover, and then they PCS, permanent change of station. They PCS me back to Anderson in September of '69. And I went back doing the same thing. I was so good that they wanted me back.
So explain a little bit more again for the camera, the process itself. So I'm visualizing these 40-foot flatbeds with containers, 55-gallon containers.
Standing up, and they'd be on pallets.
Right.
And when they got to Anderson, they were offloaded with forklifts.
Right. And
then they were stacked vertically with the bungs horizontally, so they wouldn't dry out. And they were not stacked higher than 2 rows. They wouldn't go 3 high. So it was only 2 rows. And they got to the second level, sometimes with a forklift if the guy was good enough. But most of the time it was laying down 2x4s and rolling them down the 2x4s to their position on top of the bottom row with the bungs. And they weighed, the drums weighed about, I used to know exactly. The drums weighed about, it was either 453 pounds or 653 pounds, but I can't remember. But I had one of them roll off as I was trying to straighten the bungs up, because sometimes when they were taking drums off, they would roll, and then the guys didn't bother straightening them, and they'd leave them cockeyed, and they just stick a board there to stop it from rolling any further. And so, I got inspected often because I was in charge of the drum storage lot, and so I had one come off and roll on me, and it broke my right wrist.
Yeah, it would crush a man, I think, 450 pounds, right?
Well, it almost did. I kept it from crushing me by holding, because it came off. It was weird. It rolled off, and then it landed on its bottom, but then it came at me, and I held it back like that, but I broke. Well, you can see this wrist. Can only go back so far. So it broke hairline fractures across my wrist here. And but then they put me in a cast. I was in a cast for, I guess, about 6 months.
Could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. Yep.
So the normal procedure then is it's stacked up, and then at some point the process is to get it off of the
me or whoever was doing it, getting it off of there the best way you could.
Yeah, and then
then it had to be it had to be either sucked out, but a lot of times the pump wouldn't get a prime where it would suck, and so then we had another device that hand pumped the drums,
Right.
and it always left 2 or 3 gallons in the bottom of the drum.
How long would it take to hand pump a big drum like that, though?
55 gallons.
Yeah.
Not long, probably 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, and I put in 6 drums into the trailer. It was like a half and half mixture of the herbicide with diesel. And then, if they had any waste JP4 laying around,
Don't ask, don't tell, right?
yeah, it got dumped in there. And anything else that
Yeah.
was,
Want to get rid of.
yeah, they wanted to get rid of. And a lot of times a guy would be driving the trailer or driving the truck. A higher ranking dude would be driving the truck, and I would be on the top of the trailer, straddling it or standing on the fender. It had a pretty wide fender, those A1B trailers, and I sprayed the fuel pipeline, a double fuel pipeline, 2 12-inch lines that ran from Anderson to Apra Harbor, actually down to the Naval Fuel Supply Depot. And they ran down through past 2 more of our tank farms at Potts Junction and Tumon Tank Farm, and then the Naval Air Station, we had a booster pump station, and I had 3 gigantic 4-phase pumps that put out in excess of 3,400 pounds per inch on the pipeline. And that was a lot of pressure. And one pipeline was strictly JP4 because those B-52s took a lot of gas. And we had 262 B-52s at Anderson. That's a lot of bombs. I don't know how Vietnam is still standing. But I know there's a lot of Marines that wouldn't be back here in the U.S. or Army if it wasn't for those B-52s. And now, if you've noticed, they're still using them against ISIS. They're still using the B-52s.
So, just again for the education for the film, as you were taking those 55-gallon barrels and essentially putting them into the tankers.
Right, the fuel tank.
Fuel tanks. And the fuel tanks now, is that where there would be the mix with the diesel?
No, I had to go up to the hard stand where the downspout is, the diesel fuel refueling stand, and I had to put the diesel into the trailer there.
Okay. So you'd be putting in the herbicide,
then the diesel,
and that's where it would mix in the trailer?
Yep.
And then now you're riding that trailer out to the B-52s, right?
Well, around the revetments I sprayed, the flight line areas, the security fences. And back in those days, we didn't have the sensors we've got now. They had a direct line of sight sensors only during the Vietnam War. They had sensors, but they were direct line of sight. If something broke the light, then it would go off. Kind of like a garage door opener, kind of a sensor. That's what they had back then.
So aside from so you used that at the base too, right?
Yeah, on base and off base. I sprayed the fuel tank farms off base at Potts Junction and Tumon Tank Farm, and the Naval Air Station, Air Force Booster Pump Station, and then we had 4 Air Force underground transfer tanks at the Naval Fuel Supply Depot down by Apra Harbor, and I would spray around those fuel valve pits around those tanks.
And the device you used to spray it was what? It was just a.
That was a hose with a big long metal piece with a nozzle on the end.
And all that time, just so I understand, what you're wearing is some goggles.
Yeah, but I took them all off.
Yeah,
I only did that I only wore that stuff when I put it in. I wasn't wearing it when I sprayed.
Yeah, so it got all over you anyway.
Yeah, I was soaked.
Yeah,
I would be soaked. My fatigues were soaked.
Yeah.
the importance of getting rid of the weeds was what? So people could not infiltrate the.
Well, so yeah, so it wouldn't, and you could see if the pipeline was leaking too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And the pipeline now was removed, and they buried it. It's not above ground no more. Because there was this guy, he found me 40 years later, and he was with the 43rd Civil Engineering Squadron, and his name was Ralph Stanton, staff sergeant. And he had a crew of 8 people, and they had to do the corrosion control on the pipeline, because I don't know if you know it or not, but Agent Orange herbicides will eat metal. It will eat metal. And
Well, you can imagine what it would do to a human being.
right. That's another thing with my family ancestry. You won't believe how I got more into finding what was happening, but the Agent Orange will email. So him and his crew were out there doing corrosion control with ball peen hammers and and anti-corrosive paint. Whatever you want to call it. It was red-looking paint, but probably had
Sodium type paint.
yeah, it probably had lead in it. Well, they are out there chipping, and so these poor guys, when I would go by spraying, they'd see me coming. They have to move because they'd be under the pipeline, and they get out of the way, and so they'd be calling me all kinds of names. And the most famous one was a little bastard. That's what they called me, a little bastard. Well, this guy, when he called me 40 years later, that's exactly what he called me on the phone. He goes, "You little bastard, where have you been?" I was like, what? He lives down in Savannah, Missouri. So this guy finds me 40 years. Well, all of his lights came on, and this was right after July 29th, 2008. That's a significant date. It's a significant date for anybody that was ever exposed to Agent Orange. That was when they released the Agent Orange update of 2008. Was July 29th, 2009. Not 2008. July 29th, 2009. They released it on that date.
That's when they fessed up?
That's when they fessed up. And he called me August 7th of 2009. My lights came on when I saw the report. Everything that was happening to me. And he's got a lot of diseases, but his aren't the same. He's got a few like mine, but most of his are different. So I couldn't figure out what happened to him. What's happening to you? And so I was trying to find the common denominator of how do our diseases connect. And I'm talking, I got 42. He's got 20 or 25. How do all these 67 diseases, how do they connect?
Are you talking diseases or symptoms?
Diseases.
Diseases.
Yeah. So I find out, I start looking, and I didn't look for, documents or anything like that. I was just looking for medical terminologies. What connects these diseases? Well, what it was autoimmune. They were all autoimmune diseases. There's 326 autoimmune diseases. Well, I put in autoimmune diseases and doing search on the internet, on Google. What comes up in October of 2009? Admiral Zumwalt's testimony to Congress that they classified for 20 years. They classified it in 1990 or 1991.
So they knew all that time.
Yeah, they knew all that time. He knew all that time. Admiral Zumwalt knew. And they tried to make him look like a madman. And they're the ones that hired him to do all that research for the VA and the Defense Department. So they tried to make him look like a madman, right? So I find the document. Well, all of a sudden, after I find it, and I start making JPEGs out of it, and I start posting it everywhere, all of these veteran service organizations, they're asking me, how did you find this? Where did you find this? How did you find this? And I'm talking about VVA and Blue Water Navy and War Vet or VFW and American Legion and all of them. Well, I didn't know it, but they had they had office fulls of people. That's all they did was looking for documents about this Agent Orange, and I didn't know it. I didn't know what all these people were doing. Nobody ever told me nothing. And here I was in the service my whole life. I guess I was immune to what was really happening. And, I was having illnesses, but I never put two and two together until that July 29th, 2009 release. That's when my lights came on.
What percentage of disability do you have at this point then?
I'm 100%.
You're 100%.
Yep. I'm actually 240%.
240%.
Yep, but they're probably going to make me probably 500% because of the cancers that aren't even...
I didn't know you could go above 100%.
Oh, yeah. You can actually get this. If you're 100% on one condition and then you get another condition that's 60% or more, they will double your compensation.
Yeah.
But they don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, it's all a money game. You guys know that, right? What do you think the Agent Orange cover-up is all about? It's all about money. They know what I did there. They even started making the mistake of putting it in my APRs, which is Airman Performance Reports. They started putting it in my performance reports in '76 about the vegetation control. They wouldn't mention Agent Orange in particular, but, we stopped using the drums in '71. So you know what they started having me do then after that, right? Silvex, which is 7 times more deadly than Agent Orange. And it comes in 50-pound bags.
Bags?
Bags.
So it's a powder or something?
Yep. Powder and granules. And you heard...
Get into your lungs and...
Oh, yeah. Well, I dumped it in the same trailer. But you didn't mix it with diesel fuel. You had to mix it with water.
If you're 500% disabled, does that mean you get 5 times the amount of...
Well, it depends if you have one that's 60% or more.
Oh, I see.
I've got 42 conditions that are rated at 10% or greater.
So it's just a numbers game.
It
They
is!
just play games with the numbers.
Yeah, I have 42 conditions that are 10% or greater. I am service connected for 42 diseases. How many people do you know that are service connected with 42 diseases?
Would you feel comfortable naming a couple of diseases to someone who doesn't have a medical degree?
Yeah,
Read off a couple.
ischemic heart disease,
Give me another.
spinal stenosis,
One more.
sciatica.
Okay.
Wait a minute, peripheral neuropathy.
What the hell is that?
Peripheral neuropathy, that's the nerve damage in your limbs. Most of the time, when somebody has peripheral neuropathy, they have diabetes too. Let me tell you what Agent Orange did to me. In 1976, they discovered that I was sterilized.
Yeah.
I had 0 spermatozoa. 0.
Zero.
Well, the Navy over at Agana Hospital, Agana, Guam, U.S. Naval Hospital, a doctor, I'm not gonna remember, Captain, I got the documents. Ingram. He was the Naval Hospital urologist. So my wife at the time, she was a Navy. It wasn't my current wife. My wife at the time, her father worked at Anderson, and she wanted to find out why she couldn't even get pregnant. So they went and checked me out, and I had 0 spermatozoa. I was totally sterilized.
How many years did you work with this stuff? Total?
10 years.
10 years?
Yep.
All in the Guam area, mostly?
Yep, Anderson. Yep. And there was a lot of different varieties of Agent Orange.
Yeah.
I guess the most deadly was the Silvex, the powdered. And I dumped the bags in the trailer. And I'd fill it with water, and then I would dump in the waste fuel, the waste JP4. and then I'd spray it. I'd spray it right down that island, all the way from Anderson all the way to the.
Did you ever ask for a transfer?
Oh yeah. I went back to Guam in '76. So yeah, let's see. I was stationed on Guam in September '69 to let's see when I left over there. May of '71, and then May '71, I went to Loring Air Force Base. From '71 to '72. And my wife at the time didn't like Loring because it was way up there by St. John's, Canada, way up there, right by the Canadian border. She didn't like it because there was a lot of snow there, and you never saw much sun. And they had a ceremony in July for the last snowfall melting. Actually, it was with the 106s, and I was 50. They kept me with the 52s up there at Loring, and that was really tough duty up there. And anyhow, she wanted out of there, so she convinced me to transfer to Vandenberg. So I put in a base of preference, and so they sent me. I re-enlisted, and they sent me to Vandenberg in '73 or '72. And so I wasn't there 6 months, and they gave me a PCS to Galena Air Force Base, Alaska. And so I went there from '73 to '74, and that was a 72nd Air Base group. And I remember Colonel Angel was the base commander, and we were up there when we started to get attacked by Russia in November, December of '73. And the Russians were going to attack Turkey, and we were DEFCON 4, or maybe we went to DEFCON 5. I don't know. We were like right. I mean, we were like one second from nuclear war, and so our base got. We actually were. We didn't get fired upon, but we were flown over by 2 MiGs. At Galena Air Base in Alaska in November of '73, and we were ordered to evacuate the base. And the next thing I know, we had every F4 in the Alaskan Air Command got into Galena, and up there, Galena, they have to land on a chain. They have to have the air. They have to be carrier F4s, and they have to land with a hook, with a barrier to stop them. And so they brought in every F4 they had into Galena, because they had, right when all that was happening, they had Bear bombers coming across the Bering Sea, and most Americans don't know. We lost a KC-135 shot down over the Bering Straits, and then we shot down a Russian MiG, out over the Aleutian chain. We shot down, and that Colonel Angel had a heart attack when he got a call to evacuate our base, and so we had to pack everything up and go out and kind of like set up a lean-to city or a tent city away from the base, and everybody had an M16 and get ready for the Russians to invade Alaska.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really bad.
And what year was this again, please?
'73.
'73.
Yep. So that all kind of, petered away, and everybody started breathing normal again because everybody kind of backed off, and after they actually had people dying. And I can't remember it was all kind of a whirl. And then so '74, I transferred there in June to Grand Forks Air Force Base. They liked me staying in the north. So I was at Grand Forks from '74 to '76. And up there, they would send me out chopping missile silos, and I was still POL up there. And I started doing, they wanted me to do the accounting, and I was really good at it. But back then they were doing UNIVAC 1052s for their supply system, the card decks.
Yeah.
Gosh, it was really bad. Sometimes if you had one little punch off, you couldn't process your whole decks and everything. And so I did that for a while, and we set the time to climb record up there when I was there in 75. We set the time to climb record with a F-15. They stripped down completely and chained it to the runway there at Grand Forks, and it was like in March when the air was real thin because it was real cold, and they set a time to climb record with an F-15. The aircraft that held it was a T-38, and I thought that was weird. I don't know, maybe it was an F-4 back then. I think it was the T-38, and a single canopy version was an F-4. So that's what held the time to climb record till the F-15 broke it, which I still think is a great aircraft. So then I went from Grand Forks in 76 to Guam, and I was at Anderson again doing the Agent Orange thing and the off-base fuel pipeline operations and refueling 52s if they needed me on base, if we had some deployments happening, and so you had to go wherever you were needed.
Did you ever fly out of Vietnam? Did you ever get in?
No, I never. They were, get this, right when all that started to end in 73. In 71, they were going to put me on a Bladderbird, which was 130s with the bladders in the back, and because POL guys had to do the forward operating bases for the Hueys and all that, and go in and refuel their ground tanks, their mobile rubber tanks that they use for their Hueys and stuff like that. And so they were getting ready to train me into doing the Bladderbird stuff, and then it all kind of came to an end. But now you see they went and did that all a big thing now with the Afghan OEF. Right. They got into the bladder stuff, so that's a big operation, forward operating fuel system. But I got out of the fuels business in 80. So I went from Grand Forks to Guam from 76 to 78, and I went through Typhoon Pamela over there, and then I came back in 78. I went to Charleston Air Force Base with the 437th Airlift Wing, and then I got transferred. They gave me a choice. I was really good at being a POL guy, and I operated the storage systems there at Charleston, and then I did the swing shift mobile refueling operations, and we had about 40 refuelers, and I was supervising. I think I had about 60 men and women under me refueling the C-141 Starlifters. And we supported the 101st Airborne with the Starlifters from Charleston, and so then they gave me a choice. I was a tech sergeant, and they gave me a choice of being a security policeman or flying AWACS and being monitoring the screens, or becoming an accounting specialist. So I chose to be an accounting specialist. So that's what I transferred. I went to Shepherd, went through the training program for that, and I was sent from Charleston to Griffiths Air Force Base, and that's with the 416th Bomb Wing. and I ended up making master, and I was the comptroller superintendent, accounting and finance superintendent at the 416th Bomb Wing. And that's where I retired active duty.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It was a lot of responsibility. I worked with OSI agents, and I was doing a lot of classified stuff.
Remind me, please, what does POL stand for?
Petroleum, oils, and lubricants.
POL.
Yeah, but the real name is painting, odd jobs, and landscaping. That's the real. I got real good at painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just as you fast forward, when did you start getting symptoms of, things were starting to happen?
Falling apart?
Yeah.
Let's see. I retired in '87. I went to JCC. Get this, the VA, or the Congress, took my GI Bill from me that I earned in '67, the old GI Bill, and I was promised 10 years to use it after I retired from active duty. I was promised 10 years to use it after I was honorably discharged. Well, in 1985, they came up with a Montgomery GI Bill, and they gave me a choice. You either re-enlist, or you're not going to be eligible for the Montgomery GI Bill. And I said, I've had enough. I don't want to go overseas anymore, because they were trying to make me take another overseas assignment to Kadena Air Force Base, Kadena Air Base in Japan. I said, I don't want to go back over. I've been over there twice. I don't want to go back. And so they said, well, if you don't take the assignment, then you are ineligible to re-enlist. And in order for me to use my GI Bill to get a 4-year extension to it, I had to be in until after June of '88.
Ugh.
Well, I retired active duty on 1 December '87. They stopped the GI Bill in December of '89. I got to use the GI Bill for 1.5 years. I didn't get the 4 years. And so I graduated from JCC in 89. I graduated, and I got an associate of associate of science, an AS degree in business, and so then I went to work for the 416th Bomb Wing. I got a civil servant job up there from January '90 to February of '91, but then the base closed, and so I lost my job. So I came back to Jamestown and was looking for work, and I couldn't find any work. So I tried to go back to college. Well, that's when I didn't have the GI Bill, so I had to borrow money to go to school because they took it away from me. And when I retired active duty, the reason why I went to school is because the U.S. Postal Service in Buffalo denied me employment because they told me I was physically unfit to do any job for the U.S. Postal Service. And they even put it in writing. And I went and seen the U.S. Postal Service doctor and all that, and the Postmaster General in Buffalo. And they said, your discharge physical shows you've got bilateral spondylolysis, and you could become paralyzed from your waist down. If we give you a job, you could become paralyzed. So they wouldn't hire me. So then I filed a claim with Buffalo for the bilateral spondylolysis. They were denying me employment of any physical job, and but they denied it. They said it didn't. I didn't have no disease, but yet they wouldn't show me my discharge physical X-rays. And did you know they kept it from me even to this day? But they admitted to having it and the disease being so severe that I couldn't get a job. They admitted it in June of 2005. They admitted it. Almost, what is that, 20, what is that, 15 years later, they admit to the disease, or even, 25 years, they admit to it. So that's why I went and got the job up at Griffiths. And so then I lost the job because of the base closing, and I got accepted back over to Fredonia, and I graduated. I started having problems, and I didn't know it, with heart problems at Fredonia, climbing the stairs in the accounting building at Fredonia. And I didn't know it, but you know what it was I had a pain right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know it, but it was only when I went upstairs. And so that was in, let me see, I graduated in Fredonia in 93. So from 91 to 93, I started having problems. And well, as luck has it, I was able to acquire a job in 95. December of 94, I got hired by the Defense Finance and Accounting Service in Columbus, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And I got in as a GS 7911. And it was a professional accounting series, 510 series. And I was auditing defense contracts. And I did that up until I went to REF Lakenheath in August of 2000. And I went over I got that job, I put in for it, and my daughter went with me over to REF Lakenheath, and we were over there until June of 2003. And then we were attacked in September 11th, when I was over there. And my daughter and I, we were living off base, we couldn't live on base. And we were at the front gate, and British Special Forces had the gate barricaded, and they had M60 machine guns on both sides of the road, and they had an armored vehicle with some kind of a small howitzer or something on it. And anyhow, they had a delivery truck come from Germany. It was going to the base commissary, and underneath that were hidden 10 Iraqi terrorists.
Really?
Yep, with AK-47s. And here my daughter and I are sitting in my little car at the gate, and they wouldn't let us through with this delivery truck and right by us. And the German shepherds with the base security police, SPs, the dogs alerted onto the truck. And there's like 3 or 4 of these German shepherds underneath it trying to eat the bottom of the truck. And these Iraqis dropped their guns out of the bottom of that truck. And they were kind of screaming, the gibberish stuff. And they got down, and the British Special Forces and the security police handcuffed them right there by the car, and they finally let us go by to get away. I thought they were going to just start shooting.
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty. That was pretty hairy. That was hairy. That was kind of a nervous thing. But life changed when September 11th. Life changed for us, and they tried to detonate a dirty bomb in Thetford, UK. That week, the British Special Forces got the guy before he could put it together.
Yeah.
Or it would have killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
Probably half of England, or at least that part of the Norfolk, Suffolk counties. They're over there in England.
Leroy, I was just walking in and we saw on the side of your one of your vehicles out there about Agent Orange and about the next frontier. I forget the term. What's your role in all this? I mean, in a sense, what's the message that any student would want to hear from you?
Well, right now, I know there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of children in Chautauqua County that are deformed from Agent Orange. So I know that the learning disabilities are connected to Agent Orange. My granddaughter was born with 24 fingers and toes and autistic, and she's legally blind. And she's a student over at School 3 in Dunkirk. Well, she has a hard time, and before they realized she was blind, they were punishing her for not paying attention before they found out that she was, couldn't see. But a lot of children in Chautauqua County, well, you guys know how many men served in the Vietnam War from Chautauqua County. A lot. A lot. My graduating class in '67 was 900 or 1,100. It was huge. It's one of the largest graduating classes that they had. They, all of them could have had children that, and most probably were affected by Agent Orange in some way, shape, or form. And they don't realize it. They don't know it, and I blame the Defense Department and Congress and the chemical companies and the VA for not wanting to discuss it, for not wanting to provide a avenue where these answers can be given, or help the people that were affected by it that didn't know they were affected by it, because they don't. My wife lost her first husband to Agent Orange. Over here at Absolute Care, he died at the age of 60. He didn't even know his own wife or his own son when he died. He died from esophageal cancer, dementia, and prostate cancer at age 60, and they didn't know what he died from. And he was a brown water Navy vet, and he was on the USS Pyro and the LST San Joaquin County, and he was in the right in the rivers of Vietnam.
Is there a clearinghouse if someone thinks they have a child or a grandchild who's affected by this? Is there a federal clearinghouse people can go on?
No.
And there's nothing.
Nothing.
So you're basically on your own to figure this out for yourself.
Yeah.
And to prove it.
Yeah, and to prove it. The hospitals, these emergency rooms, they have no idea. Yeah. They don't know what they're looking at. The doctors, the pediatricians, the clinics, they have no idea what they're looking at, because nobody has shared why this child could have been affected by the dioxin. And it's genetic. It's epigenetic.
Is there an individual organization out there, non-government related, that's spearheading this effort?
Well, there is an organization. It's called the National Birth Defect Registry, and Betty Medici in Florida. She lives in Florida, and I've communicated with her a few times. So she was trying to run a record of how many children that are registered, or babies, are registered that are the grandchild or child of, or great-great-grandchild of a Vietnam veteran that could have been exposed to Agent Orange. And it's not just in country. I had the most severe exposure that probably any human has ever had.
Right.
I don't know of anybody that handled what I handled in the amount that I handled.
For that period of time.
Yeah, I handled over 1 million gallons by myself. I was mixing it. Most guys are only over there, what, A year?
13 months.
Yeah. I was handling it for 10 years. I don't know of anybody.
You're lucky to be alive today.
That's what I've been told. I'm 1,000,000 to 1. It was 1,000,000 to 1 for me to father a child. I was totally sterile. They gave me testosterone shots intravenously in my hips. I was supposed to have 36 injections. I only made it through 18 because my body rejected, and I went through anaphylactic airway closure at Anderson. My airway closed off, and that was in May of '77 at Anderson. It's on my medical records. So my airway closed off, and the doctor, Ingram, and he was a Chinese doctor, but his name was Dr. Ingram, Captain Ingram. He said it could take 10 or 15 years for this to work, if it works. Well, that's how long it was when I fathered. That was in '77. My daughter was born December 20th, 1991.
Wow.
So it took 14 or 15 years then for it to work. So he was right. And then he said it could make me smarter. Well, some guy, this guy, he has a big radio show for Fox, and he started laughing when he said it, but then he said, that's actually true. This testosterone injections can make somebody where they remember more things, or they become more focused. It increases your focus. Well, I have to admit, I do remember more things than I used to.
Amazing details that you have.
I know. Well, I ended up having a massive 54 heart attacks and 2 strokes when I started to go work for DPAS in January of '95, and then I had massive heart attacks from January of '95 until July. And I got to the point that I couldn't even walk out of work in the old Lockheed hangar down in Columbus, Ohio. You had to walk over this big gantry over the hangar where my office was at with all these other people, and I had to walk, and in the end I had to put my chest on one of those secretary office chairs and push myself out of my work because I had such a bad heart attack in the work, and nobody was there. They all had left, and I was having a difficult time getting into work on time, not knowing I was having heart attacks at home. So then there was a doctor at General Hospital. I went to this St. Anne's Hospital in Westerville, Ohio, with my daughter, and the guy said I could I went in there, and he did an EKG on me, and he said I could drop over dead any minute. And he said, we're going to have to take your daughter and put her into a foster home. And I said, my daughter was 3. I said, you're not doing that. And I got up, took those things off of me, and I walked out, got in my car, went home and got our clothes and suitcases and my daughter, and I drove all the way back up I-71 to come back to Jamestown, and I drove with my legs because both of my arms were numb. I couldn't lift up my arms, and so I drove back, and my mom and dad were still alive, and she watched my daughter, and I went to General Hospital, and I can't remember the doctor's name. He wanted me to go right down to WCA, and they did some heart scan, and they found out I had deprivation in the lower chamber, oxygen deprivation. Mm-hmm. And so then they sent me right over to Hammett, and that was September 27th of '95, and they did an angioplasty. Dr. Petrella and Dr. Ney of the something associates, I can't remember right at the second. And anyhow, they did a catheterization on me, and they told me I was 100% blocked and that I couldn't leave. on the LAD. And so they were going to do a roto-rooter on me the very next morning. That was the 26th. So the 27th they did the surgery at 8 in the morning. Well, they did the angioplasty roto-rooter for 8 hours on me. And they couldn't get all the blockage out. Well, they were putting in the last stent. I had 3 put in. They put in the last stent and my LAD ruptured. And then my aorta ruptured. And I died. And they had to do 28 hours of emergency open heart surgery. Dr. D'Angelo and Dr. James V. O'Connor. And I died. They had to take my heart out of my chest. They took my mammary artery out of my back. They took the veins out of my legs. You know, from my ankle to my neck. I was cut open like a pineapple. And so then they got my heart back in my chest, but then they couldn't get it started again. And they massaged my heart for 2 hours. Okay. And I didn't know I had passed away, but I had a dream that I was in a garden and Jesus was holding me in his lap in this garden. And I was in that garden with him, and he was telling me, I told him that I couldn't stay there. I had to go back and take care of my daughter. And he was telling me he didn't know if I could come back. And I was in an argument with Jesus Christ in this garden. I thought it was a dream, right? It was so abstract. But I told him I wasn't going to stay there. I don't care what he said. He'd need an army. I wasn't staying. And so then, in the end of this dream, I told him, okay, I'll stay, but you got to promise me you won't let my daughter become homeless or starve, and you won't, you'll let her have a home. And so he promised me that. And then the next thing I remember is I looked up into his face. I didn't see no face. It was just his hood. And I looked up in there, and it was the whole universe up inside of his hood. So, and I said, what? I got scared. And I pulled away, and he told me not to be afraid. Everything was going to be okay. And the next thing I know, he pulls me back up, and I have a flash of light, and I wake up, and I'm in my bed in intensive care. And I had a respirator down my throat making me breathe. And I try to start talking, and these nurses all come running over in the intensive care unit at Hammett in the D'Angelo clinic there, and so they put me back under, and the next thing I wake back up and they're pulling that out of me, and that was like my insides being pulled inside out when they pulled that thing out of me. It was a big metal tube. And so they pulled that out of me, and so I tried to talk, but I couldn't, because my voice box was split from that tube. And the next thing, they started giving me ice chips, and next thing I know, they started giving me popsicles, and it was maybe a day or two, I guess, later. Other people came in to see me, my daughter, my parents, because they all were surprised that I made it, and everything. And so then Dr. D'Angelo and Dr. O'Connor and then this Chinese doctor came, and all the nurses. It must have been probably 100 people around my bed, and they all wanted to know where I went to. Wow. I guess they all knew that I had died, and they all wanted to know where. And they told my parents I could come out a vegetable because I was gone that long, that I could have a lot of brain damage. And so I tell everybody I did. I came back a carrot. I'm a carrot. So that's what I am. So I was pretty lucky. I was 1,000,000 to 1 to survive that surgery, I was told.
Come in contact with Congressman Ross.
Yep.
Tell me about that, the whole process.
It came because of Channel 8, Tampa WFLA, Steve Andrews. He came to my home at the invitation of a U.S. Marine that was stationed on the USS Proteus. His name was Brian Moyer. And he invited Steve Andrews to my home at Lakeland. And he wanted Steve Andrews to know about me and what I did. And so they did 4 segments about me down there. And I was on their news for 2 months, every day for 2 months down there.
What year would this have been, please?
2016. In fact, when you look them up, you'll probably see those segments.
A Target 8 investigation.
Tonight, chemical cover-up. He claims he sprayed Agent Orange on an airbase in Guam, exposing American veterans and their families to toxic chemicals. The military contends it didn't happen. A Lakeland veteran is sick and dying. He suffers from multiple cancers and autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, he contends it is from spraying that Agent Orange while he was stationed at an airbase in Guam. And he has some unfinished business, too. He told Target 8 senior investigative reporter Steve Andrews that he wants the truth to come out. Finally, the truth.
Former Master Sergeant Leroy Foster claims that he personally sprayed hundreds of thousands of gallons of Agent Orange at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. The Department of Defense insists that did not happen. Who do you believe? In the 60s and 70s, Anderson Air Force Base housed, fueled, and armed B-52 bombers for missions over Vietnam.
Yeah.
Leroy Foster's assignment at Anderson, vegetation control.
I'm the guy that was spraying it everywhere.
According to Leroy, he sprayed Agent Orange along the flight line, sidewalks, fences, fuel tank farms, and barracks.
I was spraying 2 and 3 trailerfuls a day.
He thought nothing of it.
They told me that I could brush my teeth and it wouldn't hurt anybody.
Now he knows Agent Orange is linked to several cancers, heart disease, diabetes, and more.
I've got 33 diseases. I had 28 until all the cancers started popping up.
Agent Orange also causes deformities. His own grandchild was born with 24 fingers and toes. The Department of Defense insists it did not use Agent Orange outside of Vietnam. Target 8 found this 2004 report to investors of Dow Chemical, the Agent Orange manufacturer, contradicts government claims. It says soldiers stationed on Guam who handled Agent Orange had become ill, and symptoms of TCDD, dioxins, are apparent in the general population of the island as well.
I was spraying the most deadliest substance on earth, and I am responsible for it.
Agent Orange has sickened and killed countless servicemen and their dependents who lived on base.
Terrible guilt, because all these children I've hurt, and all the unborn children that died that didn't have a chance to live.
The message Leroy Foster wants to convey to the government: just tell the truth.
Our veterans, they gave their lives to our country. They don't deserve to be lied to. If you don't want to pay for compensation, don't. But don't lie to us. Did we lie to you?
According to that report to Dow Chemical investors, Agent Orange contamination at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam was measured at an extraordinarily high level. Now, in laboratory animals, this stuff not only impacts offspring, but the next generation as well. It's pretty nasty stuff.
Well, he's in a difficult spot. I mean, he's got 5 different cancers. He's in a wheelchair, and yeah, you got the VA looking at him. And what do they say? What do they attribute these illnesses and difficulties?
You know, at first, the code it used attributed his illness to Agent Orange, but that was changed because the government insists it didn't use Agent Orange in Guam. So I've got a lot of reports that are coming in that I'm going to be looking over, and I got a lot of Guam veterans who have a lot to say about this, so we'll be exploring this a little bit more.
Chemical cover-up. Members of Congress want answers from the military following what they call a deeply disturbing Target 8 report. Today, a story about a Lakeland veteran spraying hundreds of thousands of gallons of Agent Orange on a U.S. airbase continues making waves.
Yeah, that Target 8 report aired actually last week, but today Florida Congressman Dennis Ross joined a congresswoman from Guam in stating that they're very concerned about the impact on veterans and their families. And citing a story by senior investigator Steve Andrews, they decided they would go to the Air Force and demand some answers, and they want these answers fairly quickly, Steve.
Yeah, they do. They want them next week. Both Congressman Ross and, Madeline Barrera of Guam are incredibly concerned. And they should be, following a personal, powerful, pointed report about the effects of Agent Orange. It made headlines in the Pacific Daily News, the Guam Daily Post, Radio New Zealand, Radio Australia. A Lakeland veteran admits that in the 60s and 70s, he exposed Air Force personnel, their families, and civilians on Guam to Agent Orange.
Nobody told them what was going to happen, and it destroyed families.
One day after Target 8's report, in which Master Sergeant Leroy Foster expressed extreme remorse for spraying the defoliant at Anderson Air Force Base, Congresswoman Madeline Bordeo of Guam conveyed concerns in a letter to the Air Force. She wrote, "I'm deeply disturbed with the recent claims that Agent Orange was actively used at Anderson Air Force Base. She wants any reports of any use of the chemical on island." Anderson loaded B-52s for missions over Vietnam. The Department of Defense has denied using the herbicide on Guam. Leroy Foster calls that a lie.
I don't deserve to be lied to. I don't. And the people that I exposed to it, they don't deserve to be lied to.
Foster claims he sprayed Agent Orange on Anderson's flight lines, sidewalks, around barracks and fences.
Everywhere.
He claims military personnel, their families, and civilians were all exposed.
Thousands.
Last year, a study of Guam by the Hawaii Journal of Medicine and Public Health found infants born to mothers who lived in Agent Orange sprayed areas were at an increased risk of infant mortality due to congenital anomalies. Foster's own granddaughter was born with 24 fingers and toes. He suffers from 5 cancers. Congresswoman Bordeo wants answers. Leroy Foster wants the truth to come out.
Don't lie to me anymore. Don't lie to the American people. They don't deserve it.
Congressman Ross wrote a letter to the chair of the House Armed Services Committee today. He asked if the committee is investigating the use of Agent Orange on military installations in Guam. If not, he's requesting a vigorous oversight investigation.
And that is not the only letter that he sent out as well, right?
No, again, citing our report, he sent one to the Secretary of the Air Force requesting more information by next week about the use of Agent Orange at Anderson Air Force Base. And it's not confined to Guam.
Now exposed to Agent Orange, a former Marine worries that his own life is at risk.
Yeah, the military actually denies using Agent Orange on Guam, where this particular Marine was stationed. But Target 8 showed us evidence it did. Our senior investigator, Stephen Andrews, is joining us now, and he's actually convinced a congressman to get involved in here to get to the bottom of what appears to be a big cover-up.
Yeah, it sure is. After our report, Congressman Dennis Ross called for a meeting with the Air Force and an investigation of this issue. Ross told me next week he will introduce a bill that provides veterans who served in Guam the same Agent Orange benefits as those who served in Vietnam. Brian Moyer was a Marine assigned to the U.S. Naval Station on Guam in 1974. His job? Guard nuclear weapons and a nuclear submarine. He also attended firefighting school at Anderson Air Force Base.
I found out that was possibly one of the most contaminated spots on the planet.
Last week, Target 8 revealed Sergeant Leroy Foster admitted spraying toxic Agent Orange over a period of 10 years in Anderson. The herbicide causes several cancers, diseases, and nerve disorders.
I'm laying in bed, and all of a sudden, 2 o'clock in the morning, both my arms go numb.
Brian heard of Agent Orange, but back then had no clue how deadly it is.
They knew. They knew.
The government did know. This 1967 report obtained by Target 8 is by the RAND Corporation. It was given to the Assistant Secretary of Defense and states about Agent Orange, one ingredient, 2,4-D, is rated as very toxic. I shared this information with Florida Congressman Dennis Ross. The government was very aware of the toxicity levels of Agent Orange. Why the cover-up? Why the denial?
I don't know, but we want to get to the bottom of this.
The military denies using Agent Orange on Guam, so veterans and their families are denied expanded VA benefits that those who served in Vietnam receive. Congressman, what do you expect to hear from the Air Force next week, and why would you think they'd tell you the truth?
Well, we've got some evidence here.
Brian Moyer thinks sick and dying veterans is enough evidence.
Where the hell's our damn compassionate government?
And if we can pay for all of these things around all of the world, why can't we afford to take care of our veterans?
I couldn't agree more, Steve. I mean, for gosh sakes, let's not let the Vietnam generation be the forgotten generation. They are the sons and daughters of the greatest generation. We owe it to them.
Another member of Congress is demanding answers from the Air Force, and today the Guam legislature is forming a task force to investigate Agent Orange use on that island.
And this started when you listened to that Lakeland veteran.
Yep. He admitted spraying hundreds of thousands of gallons, and it got the attention of Congressman Wass, and it also got the attention of most of the Pacific Basin out there.
Yeah, they're reporting in Guam all about this. All right, thank you, Steve.
Sure.
He did this story, and it ended up, widening, and more veterans came out, made Congressman Ross embarrassed that this has been going on for so long. And he called me right from his halls of Congress. He called me at my house here in Florida, and he told me he was going to do something about it, and that he was going to name a bill after me. And he did, H.R. 809. And so they have it in Congress. I think there's 9 co-sponsors now. And that's to help, it's not just Guam, it's to help the American Samoa. And they brought out facts I wasn't even aware of. American Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and the territorial seas, eastern region of the theater of operations of the Vietnam War, were all had exposure to Agent Orange, that they didn't even know it. But I didn't know it. They know that there's a 450% chance of them developing cancer in their lifetime. Anybody that was in that area. I wasn't aware of that. And they knew it, but they kept it hidden from everybody. I don't have resentment. I know they were trying to win a war. And they needed that vegetation killed. Yeah. I mean, to defend the base. We had Russian trawlers going around the island all the time. You don't know what they would try to do, or if they had, frogmen or special forces try to come in and blow stuff up. No, we had Japanese soldiers come out in '73 with their rifles over their head. I want to die with the truth to be known. That's what I want. That's what I was hoping the Robert H. Jackson Center be known to bring this truth and justice to so many Americans, that so many future generations that have no idea what's going to happen to them. They're going to wonder, why is my baby born this way? Why is this happening to my baby? Why, they aren't going to have the answers. With the military, my whole entire life, 38 years, I've had things happen to me in there that a lot of people probably wouldn't want to see happen to their children when they go serve our country if they're drafted, which that could happen. The draft is being mentioned to come back for the next war. It could be a Korean war, it could be a Chinese war, it could be an Iranian war, it could be a world war. My message is to record everything the best way you can. Have witnesses. Try to keep the truth about your military service, about what you did in the service, and because I don't know if you guys have seen it, but a lot of military members, their records disappear. I've helped deputy sheriffs right here in Chautauqua County that were prior military service members, that the government, because they were on classified missions, the government wouldn't stand behind them. The government wouldn't help them when it came to the VA and their health issues that were caused by their military service. They don't have anybody to go to. And I think our community has a responsibility to the veterans that served when they aren't being supported properly. I think, you know what? If every community, every county stood up and got behind our veterans, and when they're where there's injustice, then a united voice can stop it. That's my message. When there is injustice, stop it with the truth. And when people get together and they are banded together for that, they can stop this, what's happened, and to prevent it from happening again.
Well, we salute you.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep.